All right, welcome back, everyone. We are going to move right into our last presentation for this session of the forum. And our final presentation is Accessioning Small Accruals More Efficiently via the API. Your presenters are Michelle Paquette of Smith College and Althea Topek. Smith College's College Archive gets many small accruals each year, which can be time-consuming to accession and associate with their appropriate collections in ArchivesSpace relative to their size. In this presentation, former Accessioning Archivist Althea Topek and current Metadata Archivist Michelle Paquette will discuss how Smith staff are using Airtable, the ArchivesSpace API, and a series of scripts to batch create agent records, accession records, archival object records, and their associations to each other in one fell swoop. All right, I'll turn things over to Althea and Michelle.
Thank you so much. So thank you everyone for attending today. I hope that this proves useful and informative for you. So as mentioned, we'll be talking about this process involving a variety of tools like Airtable, Python, and the API. And I'll add on there in the various things created in one fell swoop. We've also added event records now because that's how we kind of mark our accessions as officially completed. So about us, I'm Michelle Paquette. I'm the Metadata Archivist within Special Collections at Smith, and I've been at Smith for about 4 years now, and I will pass it over to Althea to introduce herself, and then she'll be taking over for a little bit from there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Althea Topek. I was the Accessioning Archivist at Smith College Special Collections for about 2.5 years and worked with Michelle to design this workflow. Next slide. So for today, we're going to first give some context for why we created this workflow and detail a few accessioning practices that may be specific to Smith College. We're going to briefly describe the workflow timeline as it relates to each staff member involved in the process. We're going to cover some specific features within the scripts and show an ingest demo. And then we're going to have 10 minutes at the end for questions. Next slide. So why accession and batch? Smith College Archives Accruals. This workflow was specifically designed to accession a batch of small college archives donations, ideally 20 or so at a time, and creating a batch accessioning workflow made sense to us because Smith College Archives has several active donors. Most of the accruals are small donations that come from alumni or relatives of alumni, and they're usually donating scrapbooks, photo albums, and other types of material that relate to a student experience at Smith College. Most of these are considered accruals because they get added to our class collections resource records, which are organized by class year. While I was the accessioning archivist, College Archives received approximately 200 small donations per year. I will say that COVID probably had a lot to do with the influx of donations, and this number might go down in the coming years. Another reason we decided to create this workflow was to cut down on accessioning time for single items, just in general. Data entry for 0.1 linear feet or a single item in a single folder may take the same amount of time as data entry for 4 linear feet because you're often creating the same amount of metadata in ArchivesSpace, which usually is a new accession record, a new archival object record, new agent records for donors or creators, and a new event record. So working in one spreadsheet is ultimately faster than creating this many individual records by hand. And finally, we needed to structure and centralize the metadata that was coming from the college archivist so it could be repurposed for importing into ArchivesSpace and easily move from me to a student assistant. We needed to create an organized workflow that didn't duplicate any labor. So to sum it up, we had a lot coming in. Each accession was taking a decent amount of time to complete, and we needed to create an opportunity to centralize and repurpose information coming from the curator. Next slide. So just an FYI, we designed this workflow to align with established accessioning and processing practices at Smith. So some of the specific details might be unique to us. Almost all of these donations are considered additions to our class collections, and they're intellectually arranged by class year of the creator. This means the parent resource record already exists in ArchivesSpace, and the donation will be represented as one new archival object within a series. Smith uses shared containers, so small, unrelated accessions share housing. Smith stores structured contact information in ArchivesSpace for our agent records. And most of the donations that we're getting have independent deeds of gifts with specific access and use agreements that need to be recorded in ArchivesSpace, which means every deed needs to be reviewed before metadata is ready for ingest. And every new archival object usually will have an individual access, use, and immediate source of acquisition note. Next slide. So just to give a brief overview of the workflow, it starts with the curator or the college archivist, and they perform routine intake by filling out an Airtable form for each donation, and this populates an Airtable sheet. This initiates the process of structuring the metadata. Then the accessioning archivist can receive the material, review the Airtable sheet and the deeds of gifts, add more metadata. The work can then be passed on to a student assistant to do container control and finish anything in the spreadsheet that needs to be finished. Once the Airtable sheet is ready for ingest, the metadata archivist can run a series of Python scripts to create all of the new records in ArchivesSpace. After all of the records are created in ArchivesSpace, a student assistant or the accessioning archivist can intellectually arrange the new archival objects in their appropriate parent series. And at that point, the material can be shelved. So I will hand it off to Michelle now.
Thanks, Althea. And actually, I think the presentation prior to this one set this up really well in some ways of like when to decide to do everything via script or not. And for you all, it hadn't, it worked to do it in these two sections. And for us, it worked to do it in this kind of one big bunch. And so I want to take a moment to frame the choice of developing this workflow and some things I think about when choosing to develop functionality to do something in batch. Just because you can automate something doesn't necessarily always mean that you should. In most cases, it probably is going to save you time, but you should consider the time it takes to do something manually versus the time it takes to plan, write code, test, make tweaks, retest, and then the time it takes to run per batch versus doing these things manually. So in our case, knowing that these types of accessions are going to continue coming our way made the time commitment for development worth it. We also try to consider what other tools we have available. Some of the things our workflow does, you can already do in batch via other methods in ArchivesSpace. You can import CSVs of accession records. You can now spawn accession records to create archival object records. But for us, we wanted to do it all in one fell swoop, in part because those methods still require a little bit more manual input, and creating agent records with contact info was particularly time consuming as a piece in our workflow, both to track down that information and to add those agents and add those relationships. The other relevant tools for us that were that we already had a basis for doing this kind of batch record creation from a project we had done called the COVID-19 Chronicles. So in this project, the college archivist had solicited submissions from staff, faculty, and students on their experience in the early days of the pandemic, and we had wanted to batch accession those submissions. So we had this foundation to draw from. We obviously had to make edits to account for a wider variety of situations, not just gifts, but also purchases and transfers, not only adding to one single collection, but to a variety of collections, not only creating person agents, but also corporate agents. We also had a few specific options for conditions governing access with the COVID-19 Chronicles, so we had to remove those preset options and kind of add in more logic. And another thing that I like to think about when making the decision to automate tasks is the long-term benefit outside of this one project. So for me, I still consider myself a relative novice in Python. This was a really great skill building opportunity and a chance to further build on that existing foundation of work and to add a frame from which we can potentially build further in the future. One example already that's come up of building further in the future is we add classification information to all of our college archives material. And we hadn't included that in the original scripts, but having done all this work, I feel really confident it's going to be pretty easy to add that piece into the Airtable form and to then add it into the scripts. Okay, so we've decided, yes, we're going to script. So how does it work? As Althea said, we have a lot of information filled out in Airtable by various parties, the curator, student assistants, the accessioning archivist. So for me, first, I download a CSV from Airtable for a specific view. We have a couple different views set up. So I have one that is specifically material that is ready for ArchivesSpace and has not yet been added. So I download that CSV. I run that through one initial Python script that renames the column names from what they were in Airtable, so they're shorter and easier to work with in all of the other scripts. So for example, in Airtable, we have a column called "Note if there is a deed, donor letter, transfer form, or no supporting documents." And that mouthful gets renamed to donation_info. So then I have a script that I call CA single accessions combined. That gets run on that new CSV file. And then this goes through each row of the CSV, calling on 4 different scripts per row. So first one for agents, then one for accessions, one for archival objects, and finally one for events. So like I said, first it creates all the agent records. If there's no URI for that agent already, there's a checkbox in Airtable to also note if the creator is the same as the donor. Creates the accession record, associating all of the agents and giving them their appropriate roles. It creates the archival object record for that row, again, associating the agents as appropriate and associating the newly created accession record. And last, it creates the event record and associates it with the newly created accession record to mark that accession as complete. Okay, so I will do just a quick demo of it working. Okay, so here's me in my terminal, typing in the initial rename script that uses pandas, if you're familiar with pandas in Python. So that's now changed the initial CSV to the renamed column CSV. And now I'm adding the running the combined Python script, and you'll know I'm typing test in here to run everything on my test server, which I always do first. And as it runs, you'll see it giving this immediate feedback of what kinds of records were created. It will give the last name of the donor as the created for such and such, unless it's creating an agent that isn't the donor. If it's creating if the creator is different, it will say the name of that person instead, but otherwise it's the name of that row, the donor in that row. And you also get the URIs in case you want to immediately kind of copy paste and go look at how something looks. And if for some reason something didn't go through, it would stop and kind of spit out the invalid JSON from ArchivesSpace to say, like, we couldn't post this and here's why, and I find that really useful. So everything's done. And for those of you who at home who are not timing this, that was about 1.5 minutes, and it created 52 agents, 62 accessions, 62 archival objects attached to 35 different collections, and 62 event records. Okay. So in reflecting on this workflow, I think there is still obviously things to improve. I already talked about adding the classifications, but this also runs on a Python module for working with ArchivesSpace that was developed by our developer, Tristan Chambers, who left, I think, over 2 years ago now. And I know that really I should work on switching these over to run on Asnake instead, which is more community supported. I've been a little hesitant to do it because I've had a hard time understanding in the past how to get useful error messages out of Asnake. Clearly, I need to do more skill building in debugging and logging in Python, so that's one thing. But we do have a very happy steward. If you're curious about the term steward, we call our curators stewards. So Nancy, our college archivist, has said, quote, "I am very happy with the newish CA small accessions workflow. In general, it allows me to get a brief handle on the oft-times overwhelming nature of what I call being nickel and dimed by generous alumni and others who see something related to Smith and automatically send it without contacting us in advance." And I will pass it back to Althea for final reflections from her.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so it's important after making, a workflow that requires you to kind of wait for a group of material to accession and batch. You should just, think about, is this working? Is it fulfilling what we wanted it to fulfill? Is it worth our time? And it really depends on how many donations are coming in, how big is the backlog, what are your priorities, how easy is it to, hand off work to like a variety of student assistants. So I would say while I was at Smith, it was working just because of the volume of material that was coming in and how everything was really just kind of one item that could easily be accessioned, similar to the other items that were in the queue for accessioning. But I think it could get more complicated depending on the material, obviously, but I think this workflow can be translated to a lot of other types of backlogs at other institutions, whether it just be going into one artificial collection, like an ephemera backlog or something else. So I would say, yeah, always reflect on whether it's working for a variety of people, especially because this workflow involves a curator and multiple members in technical services.
Okay, and with that, we've come to the end. I'm going to pop the link to GitHub up on here. And as I said, I'm a relative Python novice. So if you are very skilled in Python, please be nice. But I'm happy to answer any questions you may have now or later. And so we'll take your questions now.
Thank you both so much. Yeah, we have plenty of time for Q&A. I'm going to drop that GitHub into the chat for everyone.
No, thanks. Yeah. I had said it before to everyone and then having to rejoin, it got set back.
No, I know. Yeah. Yeah, the weird little tricks of Zoom. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. But Corey does say in the chat that he definitely relates to the to script or not to script slide and reflection on wanting to learn more about the async module and other Python packages.
Yeah, I'll just comment that I'm sure there are probably remnants of the former COVID-19 Chronicles code that my colleague Tristan had put in there that I've kind of been afraid to remove for fear of doing something weird.
I hear you. All right. No questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to go very slowly in case anyone is typing a question. But I will go ahead and say thank you so much to Michelle and Althea for this topic and for being willing to be the final session of today's forum. And thank you to everyone who's made it with us until the bitter end. I do see some people are dropping off, and I completely understand. There's some other things popping up in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and say, unless we have anything pop up in the Q&A, I'm going to say again, thank you to Michelle and Althea, and thank you to all of our presenters today. It was a great start to the forum, and I look forward to seeing all of you again tomorrow during the discussion sessions. Again, registration for those is separate, but if you would like to register and you haven't yet, please feel free to do so. I look forward to seeing you all then, and have a nice rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.